Hello, everyone. Welcome back. We are going to be going over Leviticus today, which is the book that takes place right after Exodus. We're going to start with the end of Exodus and Moses' story, which Moses is still in Leviticus, but I just want to get the bridge here so we're all in the same spot. So, Exodus ends with a major problem, and Leviticus is the solution. Exodus ends with God's glory filling the tabernacle. At the end of Exodus 34 through 38, Moses completes the tabernacle exactly as God instructed. Then something shocking happens. God's glory fills the tabernacle. Moses cannot enter. The people cannot go near. God is present, but unapproachable. This is the last line of Exodus. Israel has God with them, but they still can't be close to him. This sets up the question, how can a sinful people dwell with a holy God? And that is the question that Leviticus attempts to answer. And we're going to go into that today. We're going to go over the whole book of Leviticus, at least, an overview of it all. So let's get into it. Leviticus is the handbook for how Israel, a sinful people, can live in relationship with a holy God. Context, where it fits in the story. Exodus ends with God's glory filling the tabernacle, as we said. But no one can enter because God's holiness is overwhelming. Leviticus answers the question, how can unholy people live with a holy God? Structure of Leviticus. Why sacrifices at all? In Israel's world, God is perfectly holy. Humanity is sinful and impure. Sacrifice provided a temporary way for Israel to restore relationship, maintain closeness, and symbolically deal with sin until Christ fulfilled it permanently. The sacrificial system has 5 major offerings. Each one served a different purpose. 1. Burnt offering, Leviticus 1, or Hebrew olah, meaning to ascend. Purpose, total surrender, worship, and devotion. What happened? The whole animal was consumed in fire, unlike other offerings. Nothing was eaten, everything went to God, symbolized giving yourself fully to God. So, no one was allowed to eat any of the animal. They burned the whole thing, sacrificed all of it to God. 2. Grain offering, Leviticus 2. Hebrew, mincha, M-I-N-C-H-A-H, meaning gift. Purpose, thankfulness for God's provision. What happened? People brought flour, oil, and frankincense. A handful was burned before the Lord. The rest went to the priests as food. Symbolized gratitude, dependence, and offering God the work of your hands. 3. Peace offering or fellowship offering, Leviticus 3. Hebrew, shalom, related to shalom. Purpose, celebration, fellowship, and covenant friendship. What happened? Part burnt on the altar, part eaten by the worshiper. A sacred shared meal with God. Symbolized peace with God, joyful communion, and relationship restored. So instead of a complete sacrifice, it was half of it goes to God as a sacrifice and half of it's with you. And it's a symbolic act of sharing space and communion with God. 4. Sin offering, Leviticus 4 through 5. Hebrew, chatat. Purpose, atonement for unintentional sin or impurity. Key point, this offering deals with sins committed without realizing it, the everyday brokenness of being human. What happened? The animal's blood was applied to sacred areas. The rest was burned outside the camp. Purified individuals, priests, or the sanctuary from defilement. And it symbolized sin pollutes, God provides cleansing, the life of the creature is in the blood. Leviticus 17, verse 11. 5. Guilt offering, Leviticus 5 through 7. Hebrew, asham. Purpose, atonement for sin that required repayment. Examples, stealing, cheating, property damage, violating sacred things. What happened? Animal sacrificed. Offender paid back what they stole plus 20%. So they had to pay a fifth of interest for their wrongdoings. Symbolized, sin damages people as well as God. Restoration requires repentance and restitution. And next, the ordination of the priests, Leviticus 8 through 10. This section shows how the people's mediators, Aaron and his sons, and if we remember Aaron, he was a translator for Moses to the Pharaoh and the Egyptians. But Aaron and his sons were set apart to serve in God's presence. Leviticus 8, priests consecrated. Moses washes Aaron and his sons. They receive special garments. Sacrifices are offered on their behalf. Oil is poured on their head to symbolize being set apart, just like King David having oil poured on his head to symbolize being anointed or chosen. They remain at the entrance of the tabernacle for 7 days. Why it matters. Israel cannot approach God without a priesthood. The priests stand between holiness and unholiness, life and death. So God was an overwhelming, holy presence that your average sinner or person could not handle, which is similar to the Israelites asking Moses to be the mediator for God's voice because they could not handle God's crushing voice. So the priests had to act as the middlemen or the mediators for the tabernacle. Leviticus 9, the first priestly offerings. Aaron offers sacrifices for himself and for the people. Fire from the Lord appears and consumes the offering. The people fall on their faces in awe. This moment officially begins Israel's worship system. Leviticus 10, the sin of Nadab and Abihu. This is one of the most shocking moments in the Torah, and if we remember, the Torah is just the Old Testament. It is Genesis through Deuteronomy. Aaron's sons offer strange fire, incense God did not command. Fire from God consumes them. Aaron is told not to mourn publicly. God says, I must be regarded as holy by those who come near me. Purpose, to show that worship is not a human invention. God defines how he is approached because his presence is dangerous if handled casually. So worship and sacrifice are under God's authority, not under man's authority. And it's important to not take this lightly. Laws of purity, Leviticus 11 through 15. These chapters teach Israel the difference between clean and unclean. This isn't about sin, it's about ritual purity. Clean equals able to approach God's presence. Unclean equals needs cleansing before approaching. The logic, God is life. Anything associated with death, decay, or disease cannot enter his presence. Leviticus 11, clean and unclean animals, divides animals into clean and unclean. Symbolically teaches Israel to discern, to separate, to be distinct from surrounding nations. Leviticus 12, purification after childbirth. Not about shame, about bodily discharge and blood loss. Themes of mortality and fragility. Leviticus 13 and 14, skin diseases and mold. Deals with infectious skin conditions, also mold and mildew in houses or clothing. Symbolism, impurity spreads. Holiness must be protected. Leviticus 15, bodily discharges. Covers fluids related to life and fertility. Anything representing loss of life fluid makes a person temporarily unclean. The Day of Atonement, Leviticus 16. This is the centerpiece of Leviticus and the holiest day of the year. 2 goats. 1, the sin offering goat, sacrificed, blood sprinkled in the most holy place. And then the second, the scapegoat or Azazel. The priest lays hands on it, symbolically placing Israel's sins on the goat. The goat is sent into the wilderness. So symbolic sacrifices in these 2 different goats. Meaning, sin is covered or atoned, sin is carried away, Israel is cleansed annually, foreshadows Christ as both sacrifice and sin bearer. Next, the Holiness Code, Leviticus chapters 17 through 26. This section answers, what does a holy life look like? God says again and again, be holy, for I am holy. Leviticus 17, sacredness of blood. Blood represents life. No eating blood. Sacrifices must be brought to the tabernacle only. Leviticus 18 through 20, moral holiness. Sexual ethics. Prohibits child sacrifice, occultism, and incest. Israel must be morally distinct from surrounding nations. Leviticus 19, the holiness chapter, includes one of the most famous commands in the Bible. Love your neighbor as yourself. Chapter 19, verse 18 of Leviticus. Teaches justice, generosity, honesty, and compassion. Leviticus 21 and 22. Holiness of priests. Priests must live to a higher standard. Only unblemished offerings allowed. Leviticus 23. The festivals. 7 appointed feasts. Passover, unleavened bread, first fruits, Pentecost, trumpets, Day of Atonement, and tabernacle/booths. All pointing forward to Christ and redemption. Leviticus 24, oil, bread, and blasphemy laws. The lamp must burn continually. The bread of the presence symbolizes fellowship. A story about blasphemy shows the seriousness of honoring God's name. Leviticus 25, Sabbath year and Jubilee. Every 7th year, land rests. Every 50th year, debts erased. captives freed, property restored. A radical vision of economic justice and mercy. Leviticus 26, blessings and curses. If Israel follows God, then they will get fruitfulness, protection, and abundance. If they rebel, drought, famine, and exile. This chapter summarizes Israel's entire future history. So this is showing the importance of this binding agreement, this covenant between the Israelites and God, and Him giving them the law. It is being taught to them through the priests, through the tabernacle, through God Himself, that this is no small, shallow thing. This is a very vital, non-negotiable contract. And if they step outside of this contract, if they break the law, they will suffer the consequences of doing that and becoming separated from God and His blessings. And finally, the closing note, Leviticus 27, vows. The book ends with regulations about vows and offerings people voluntarily dedicate to God. So I'm going to have a summary to end it on, but Leviticus is right after Exodus. The whole book of Exodus is primarily focusing on Moses as a character, his life, and then all of the agreements with God and the Israelites and freeing them out of Egypt. But Moses is the central character in this. And then Leviticus is God explaining how sinful people can live near His holy presence inside their tabernacle. So this is right after the Israelites being saved, being led out of Egypt, and the tabernacle is built. Leviticus is right before the start of the 40 years in the wilderness. So they're establishing the law. They're establishing how sinful people can live with a holy God. That is what Leviticus is encompassing. So we're going to end it off with a summary. Leviticus is the heart of the Old Testament's holiness message. It sits right in the middle of the Torah because everything in Israel's identity flows from one central truth. God is holy, and He wants to dwell with His people. Exodus ended with God's glory filling the tabernacle, yet even Moses couldn't enter. Leviticus answers the question, how can a sinful people live near a holy God without being destroyed? The entire book is God's solution. 1. Sacrifice, because sin brings separation and blood brings atonement. 2. Priesthood, because unholy people need a mediator. 3. Purity laws, because God wanted Israel to reflect His distinct character in everything, even daily life. 4. Holiness code, because Israel wasn't just forgiven, they were meant to be transformed. At its core, Leviticus teaches God is not like us. Holiness is not optional. Atonement is costly. Sin contaminates more than we realize. God provides a way to be close to Him, but on His terms, not ours. And all of it, every offering, every priest, every purification, every feast, points forward to Jesus, the final high priest and the perfect sacrifice who fulfills the entire system once for all. Leviticus isn't a book about ancient rules. It's a book about the holiness and mercy of God and the lengths He goes to so His people can draw near. And let's end this with a Jesus quote when He is referencing the Ten Commandments and the original law that I guess He's referencing right here as well in the tabernacle, and that is, He did not come to abolish the law, but to fulfill it. This has been Leviticus. Thank you for watching.